we left open the question that we were saying that a sukkah built based utilizing all the various Torah klolim is representative of Torah, of the Torah definitions of what a hut is, what a wall is. That would seem to be a hidduch that is based in constantly purely on Torah definitions. But in fact, we're not saying this. Allah doesn't say that this is a hidduch. On the contrary, saying that you should build a wall in full sense. But even if it is done in a certain minimal way, it also is a kosher sukkah. So the principle in that, I believe, is like this. A person has to sit in the sukkah and he has to be aware and conscious that he's sitting in the sukkah. Like you mentioned the halacha that if the schach is above 20 amas, you're not yotze. It's not a kosher sukkah. Why? Because if the schach is above 20 amas, the sense that a person has is that he's not sitting. Doesn't say that he's sitting under the schach. He's sitting next to a wall. So, based on what we've discussed, it's conceivable that the Baal Shem Tov's Inyan, besides the heroes and so forth, Baal Shem Tov's Inyan was actually the opposite. That Baal Shem Tov, he could actually sense, in a full sense, that he is sitting in a sukkah, even if the sukkah is built according to the most extreme halachic principles. Because Baal Shem Tov Bichlal was at that level. By him, the whole world was a godly world, and therefore, in halacha, practically speaking, a person should try to build a sukkah in full structure and full content, because he will be much more conscious of the inner that he's sitting in a sukkah. There's a story about Shem Tov. The Baal Shem Tov was collecting money. He needed money for some reason. And so he was walking down the street, walked up to a certain house, and he knocked on the window 3 times, and walked away. And then the proprietor, the owner of the house, heard the knock and looked, and he saw the Baal Shem Tov pass by, so he chased after him. And then he asked him, "Why did you knock on the window and walk away?" Baal Shem Tov said that my estimate was that the extent to which I have to get involved in the physical arena of getting this money is satisfied with this 3 knocks. That already brings it as mamsheh the whole result.
But the klalim that he built the sukkah with are for everybody.
Yes, but not everybody is not sensitive to it. So therefore, in Baal Shem Tov was not legal in the sukkah. How does he build a sukkah like this if it's a kula? The answer is by him it was not a kula. because this is Baal Shem Tov's word. It's a story with the Noida Behuda. Noida Behuda was a very, very prestigious Rav in Prague. He was a Misnagit. He was in the time of Baal Shem Tov. It was like just before the Baal Shem Tov, the time of Baal Shem Tov. And he was quote unquote a Misnagit. I just want to establish that people should know a little bit the history of Misnagdim. Misnagdim were not essentially vicious people. Afterwards, they developed into totally irrational hate. But originally, the fear was very well founded because of the immediate history before that. People were very scared. But the real culprit was not the leader. The real culprit were those the Lal Rosh and Hora, who came and they related in incorrect stories. So the story of the Behuda was that he was a Rav in Prague, and there was a Shaila with an Aguna, a woman who didn't know where her husband was, and she came to the Rav and asked permission to get married. And after all the investigations that halacha requires, he came to the conclusion that she's allowed to get married, that her husband is not alive. And then, some time later, the husband appears.
After she got married.
I think it was after she got married. So the lady Behuda heard this, I came to him and heard this, and he kind of leaned his head on his hand and reflected for quite some time. Then he lifted his head and says, Api halacha, he's dead. And the next day, the man was not among the living. Api halacha, he's dead.
The next day, what?
Huh?
The next day?
He died. Okay. All right, we will start on the line that begins with Acherim. Okay. So approximately 10 lines from the bottom. The Rebbe points out, based on the Gemara, that we find the case sometimes the message is that mitzvahs are the primary thing and to take precedent over Torah. And sometimes we say fakir, that Torah takes precedent over mitzvahs. Then the Gemara, then we find two psukim. One pasuk says kol chafotzim leyishvu bo, and sometimes we find kol chafotzecho leyishvu bo. Chafotzecho is a qualifier, only a certain type of chafotzim, only some kinds of interest. Chafotzim means without any qualifiers. The Gemara says, now this is telling us that it depends on the circumstance. That if after a mitzvah that is possible to be delegated to someone else, then Torah should not be interrupted. And if it cannot be done by someone else, then he has to interrupt Torah and go to the mitzvah. So, which one is superior? Which one is more significant than the Torah or mitzvahs? So we say the Shnei HaMemes, on the end of the slide. The Shnei Amemes
Is it touch lo yishmava?
would not compare it. Yishua, show it. Shnei Amemes, both are Emes. Yesh Maila ben Mitzvahs, because there is a Maila in Mitzvah Shehein Rotzen Ho'elye. But they represent the Rotzen from above. That the Yag Mitzvahs, the Yerais of Zay Mitzvahs, the Rabbanon, the 613 Mitzvahs, and the 7 Mitzvahs of the Rabbanon Him Tarach Amudei Eir. These are the 620 pillars of light. V'kmei Ho'amud, just like a pillar Shemachaber Hagag Hemaritzpo that connects the roof with the floor. Kahamitzvahs mamshichim v'chines ein sof shelamayla m'seder ishtalshus begilu lemata. So to the mitzvahs, they draw down and bring the oil in soif, which is like the roof, the makif, above, and above m'seder ishtalshus, and bring it down to here below. V'hainu, which means to say, Shehamshocha hi sheloi behadrogo the seder ishtalshus. That the whole hamshocha is not in a graduated manner that the seder ishtalshus, that the seder ishtalshus provides, but it is a hamshocha comes straight from Ein Sof, and therefore v'nim shabozeh gilui Ein Sof mamash, and therefore since it bypasses the entire process of Gilui, there is a complete revelation and expression of Ein Sof. I'd like to elaborate briefly on this slide. What's the correlationship? If Shalei B'Hadrogo, and therefore Nimshah B'Soi Gilui Ein Sof Mamash. In principle, this is nothing new to us, but I just want to point to it. When things go through Seder Hishtalshelus, for example, when it is the Seichel that arouses and brings out the Midas, and then from the Midas into action, then the action, or the Midas, they relate to that which is immediately above them. So you say, I give this dokia because I sensed the midah of chesed. I sensed the midah of chesed because I reflected on this and this. So the seichel created the midah, and the midah created the action. The seichel itself, that goes back to a higher source. But the higher source itself is not reflected in the action. The action is conscious of the midah. The midah is conscious of the seichel. Therefore, what comes through in each stage and each rung of the Seder Hishtalshelus is a finite, a definitive cause. That this is the cause and effect within Seder Hishtalshelus. We know that the absolute truth is, as we learned in this Maimer way in the beginning, that in everything there is the Oineg HaNefesh. In every koyach there's the Oineg HaNefesh. No matter how far remote, removed, how distant it is from Nefesh, from Oineg HaNefesh. And therefore, in real truth, everything, even the most remote and most simplest of actions, is actually reflective and representative of Nefesh itself. in order to reach this action, he has to go through the Seder Shtalshalos. This Inyan that in order to reach this action, you have to go to Seder Shtalshalos, is not just in order to enable, to facilitate the action, in order to identify the action. What are we supposed to do? How are you supposed to do it? But it's more than that. It is in order that the action should have a life of its own, should have an oinik. It has to go through the Seder Shtalshalos. Alter Rebbe explains in Tanya that the real avodah has to be bi'ava b'yir. Person davens has to be bi'ava b'yir. Person has a mitzvah has to be bi'ava b'yir. But not everyone is at that madrega that he should have ava b'yir for Elokus. Even in davening, particularly during the day. So now the Rebbe says that there's another aspect in Koyches HaNefesh, which is called Machshava Toiva. Machshava Toiva means a thought that has not fully permeated his mind. And even in his mind, even in his seichel, he does not have the full impact of this Machshava. But deep down in his nefesh, mitzad Abba, Mesoteres, and so forth, he senses the inyan of Elokus. So this Machshava Toiva, this is at a much higher level than action. This is like he senses the presence of nefesh, a living entity in himself. Nefesh means something which is not mislavish in the goof. He senses it the way it is in nefesh, in the life element itself. This is really wonderful. But it's not something that he has a grasp, so to speak, in his gashmusik morally state.
His conscious mind, in other words.
It is in his conscious mind. It is almost something subconscious. Alum is sleeping in the hidden crevices of his heart.
No, I think the other way, like the
Yeah.
practical aspects he doesn't have in a conscious mind. That it should permeate his, machshava dibur ma'aser, to
Right. It does not force machshava dibur ma'aser.
It's only like remote sense of the simcha and life.
Right. It does not demand that it should express itself in thought, speech, and deed. It can remain over there. Therefore, when it does an action on the basis of this machshava teva, the action in effect, in a technical sense, has no life in it. It doesn't have a nefesh element. So that's what the Alter Rebbe says that. The Gemara says machshava teva HaKadosh Baruch Hu mitzarfo l'maisa, that HaKadosh Baruch Hu connects it to machshava teva, mitzarfo l'maisa connects it to the maisa, and it's considered as the maisa would have been done with full inspiration, with full life inspiration. That would be a living maisa. So even though this maisa in actual fact is not really full of life, but being that this machshava is what brought this action to, even though there was a gap, it's like a jumping across. It wasn't that it actually demanded the action, it brought it out, but he's doing the action on the basis of this machshava table. Therefore, this is machshava HaKadosh Baruch Hu mitzarfo HaKadosh Baruch Hu connected to the maisa, and he imbues it in the deed, and it's considered that the deed is a real living deed. But the consequence of that is that then the deed rises out of this physical world and rises up to a higher world. Otherwise, it remains in the physical world. So this is the principle of Seder Hishtalshelus. When it comes to Seder Hishtalshelus, then the Chayes HaNefesh and the Chayes HaLeki, as it goes through the various rungs and the various stages, it actually presents the Chayes in such a manner that it can actually be imbued in the lower level. And then all the way down to the actual deed in terms of the Avodah. This is the Seder Shashas. But mitzvahs bypass this entire Seder Shashas. Mitzvahs is, like I said, this is a pillar that's attached, that stands on the ground, is attached to the ceiling. Mitzvahs we do directly. Hashem said, so we do.
That's like the Machshavah Tova?
This is not Machshavah, this is even less than Machshavah Teva, the mitzvah itself. But Machshavah Teva imbues it with a chayas. But the mitzvah you can do even without a Machshavah Teva. It says in Shulchan Aruch, you should do it and he doesn't.
You should do what?
You should do the mitzvah, and the mitzvah then connects him to the top. Machshavah Teva is already to imbue the mitzvah with its richness, with Ahava V'yira. But the mitzvah itself, when a person performs the mitzvah, it's at the Ahava Mesoteres because he's a Yid. Without even revealing it, he's very connected. He did the mitzvah.
Just trying to clear the Machshavah Teva example was to show something that's not obvious Seder Hishtalshelus. Or am I wrong on that?
The reason right. This is not the point that I'm trying to make the point Paltiel, that if it is in full Seder Hishtalshelus, you don't need the mitzvah for that, because it's not a mitzvah. So we see from Machshavah Teva goes to mitzvah because it's still missing that link. Seder Hishtalshelus. Seder Hishtalshelus means that it goes in a complete and total flow,
right,
from top to bottom. So we see from Machshavah Teva this principle in Gemara Machshavah Teva, so we see how much significance there is in Seder Hishtalshelus.
Right.
This is my point. That mitzvahs connect in search of a mind of Seder Hishtalshelus directly. So what happens as a result? Here's the point. If it's Seder Hishtalshelus, then there is, as we said, then there is the oineg and the chayas as it trickles down through the various stages until it comes to the deed. When the deed is done, the mitzvahs are connected the ceiling to the floor, then there isn't that trickle down. There isn't that chayas that really pertains to the action. Therefore, what actually enables this action is the ceiling. The Ayin is safe. This is why we're saying that the mitzvahs is nimshach oyer in soif v'gilu l'mata. In soif itself is nimshach v'gilu l'mata.
Why a pillar of amud oil? Why a pillar of light? It sounds more like a ray of light, meaning originating up above. He gives us the instruction. We respond, not a pillar based on the ground going upwards.
Could be a pillar based on the ceiling.
So
Connects. Pillar means it connects the top to the bottom.
Like a rope.
A pillar does not mean it's that one stands. That's a question. What stands on what? It's a separate question. It connects.
Tzavsa.
Huh?
It's the Lashon tzavsa, connection.
Yeah. The pillar connects the top to the bottom, and therefore the Oyin of Shalamayim is nimshach begilu lamat, Because when you see Ayin putting on tefillin, for example, and he is not shaykh to understand all these things, what do you see? You see that there is a God who told him to put on tefillin.
I'm still a bit confused about why you. What's the? Is there a contrast between mitzvahs joining the top and the bottom, and the whole conversation that we had about Seder Ishtalshalos? In other words, the Seder Ishtalshalos, this that it comes down to Aviyira, that's also regarding mitzvahs, right? I mean, that he should do mitzvahs with the Aviyira, that should come through Seder Ishtalshalos, and ultimately when he does mitzvahs, they have a life to it. If he's doing them just based on Machshava Tova, then also there's some kind of but what's the point where it's coming directly from the top to the bottom?
Okay. All right. So, the truth is that none of these, whether it is Machshava Tova or even Abba V'Yira, are the essence of the mitzvah. The essence of the mitzvah is the actual connection to a certain people. The Abba V'Yira is to give, to enable the mitzvah to rise up and to give it chayis. But the power of the mitzvah itself is the beacon to a. The point of discussing or going into this Machshava Teva is to explain what does it mean you go through Seder Ishtalshalos or you avoid Seder Ishtalshalos. Mitzvahs in essence avoid Seder Ishtalshalos.
Okay, so the real power of the mitzvah does not need to come down through it.
Mitzvahs in essence, that's what he said by Matan Torah, Naaseh v'Nishma. This is in essence bypass the whole Seder Ishtalshalos. This is what he says over here. Shamshocha Yishalei Bahadog Seder Ishtalshalos. Shamshocha is not through the wrongs and the graduality of Seder Ishtalshalos. And therefore, when Nimsha was a Gilead Mamash. Therefore, in this is Nimsha the Gilead Yisrael. Because there is not the Seder Ishtalshalos, the justification for this mitzvah. What then does the mitzvah represent? Gilead Yisrael. Even in the mashal that we had of the sukkah, or of the hole in the wall and so forth, the Seder Ishtalshalos, that wall is not a wall. That wall is a wall, like we said the whole time, Al Ponai. That wall is a wall only because there is a godly, an essential presence in the world. The way it is on my who defines what the world is about, what the human being is about, and what the world is about. Okay. This is mitzvahs. But the Torah is bechinas chokhmah. Torah is in a chokhmah. The reise me chokhmah nafkos. Because as we said, Torah comes from Chokhmah. Ve'al kein, and therefore, according to this, a mitzvah is in l'mayla mi'at Torah. Therefore, mitzvahs are higher than Torah because mitzvahs reach up to the Mayim Seder Ishtalshalos, to Ayin Soif, above Chokhmah, and Torah is mechokhmah nafkos. Just want to start the next line so that we will not lose continuity. Even though that through Torah also there is Hamshocha Shalei B'Hadroga. The Kol Mokim is there's a hefresh, but there's a difference. So the Torah and Mitzvahs both have this element, Well, there's a difference the way it comes to Torah and the way it comes to mitzvahs. And this we will continue mitzvahs tonight. Just want to know like this. Lately our attendance Thursday night was very poor. If it is really difficult to come, maybe we should cancel, because it's very difficult to give a class to four walls.